My name is Sam Sipa, and I'm here I'm working at Google. I work in the Sunnyvale office. My role is as a site reliable engineer program manager. So I work with that team, our SRE team, and I'm the HR coordinator, program manager in that team. So I'm happy to host our talk today with Nyle DiMarco. He's an amazing guest to bring here today. As you know, this week is a very important time to host this event. It's our Accessibility Week, our A11Y week, and it's a time for us to learn and have fun together with all the new accessibility products that are available out there, to raise awareness and to really keep our commitment, Google's commitment, to making the world's information universally accessible to everyone. So we're really grateful that you've all come out this afternoon to learn some more about that, take your lunch time to listen to all this information. It's just awesome. So we're here to listen to Nyle, to have a conversation with Nyle. And for those of you who don't know who he is, I'll give you a quick introduction. As you know, Nyle is very well known for a lot of the different reality television shows that he's been a part of over the years, in which he's won the top prize. One of the TV shows was called Catch-22, and then America's Next Top Model. He was one of the only deaf contestant on the show, and then he ended up winning the competition. So he made history. Secondly, he also won another reality show competition, Dancing with the Stars. So we were appalled, or we were just astonished at his talent, that he was able to win a dance competition. And myself as a deaf person, to see another deaf person actually win a dance competition with the level of strict judging that goes on there was amazing. And he's also done some film and TV work in parallel with all of this. He's also done some work for modeling agencies, a very prestigious modeling agency in particular. He was offered an internship with that agency, so he's been photographed. You see him in magazines, you see him in the Macy's catalog. I mean, he's just everywhere on the catwalks, on the runways, at these fashion shows, and so. But his real passion is to focus on the phenomenon, sadly, of language deprivation among deaf children, and to call more attention to that. He's set up a whole foundation, the Nyle DiMarco Foundation, as well as he works with another movement called the Language Equality and Acquisition for Deaf Children, for Deaf Kids. Its acronym is LEAD, L-E-A-D-K. So he's done all of those efforts in parallel with developing his career. So I'd like you to all use your hands to give a warm welcome to Nyle DiMarco.
Hi, thank you all for coming.
So thanks so much for coming, Nyle. We really appreciate it. You taking some time out of your busy schedule for this, for our Accessibility Week. So we're very grateful.
Really glad I could make time to come today.
You know, accessibility is really, a week is really about educating people about what accessibility means, the fact that, you know, disabled people walk the earth, and, you know, how do we manage this? You come from a deaf family, right?
That's right.
How many deaf people in your family?
We have over 25 deaf members of our family.
Wow.
Which means that my two brothers are deaf, my parents and my grandparents and great-grandparents are all deaf. And so I'm a fourth generation deaf person myself. And so the short answer is yes, it's genetic. We carry the C16 gene, and that is what they call the deaf gene. And so that's what our family has.
Wow, awesome. So I can't imagine, you know, what is it like to live in the world where people are hearing and yet your family is deaf and uses sign language. What has that journey been like for you?
So first off, there's only 10% of deaf children come from deaf family. And so I tend to consider myself fortunate because growing up I had access to language and communication and love. And I always explained to people what it was like being raised in a big deaf family household. And it was like a utopia, really, because for me, it was so wonderful because hearing people, for example, when you're born to hearing families, you don't have any language barriers. You have access to language. You have everything. You're on a parallel with everyone around you, and it's not any different. And that's one of the best examples I can give. And people think, oh, the deaf family means the house must be quiet, right? Because everyone's deaf. They don't make any noise. But it's actually the exact opposite, because I wasn't aware of how much noise I was making. Like when I was washing dishes, how loud it was. I didn't realize how much noise that could make, putting away the dishes, slamming doors. And so when I tell hearing people, if you visit my deaf home, you're probably going to leave with a headache, guaranteed.
Wow, so basically, your life felt perfect because you had complete language accessibility with your family, right?
That's right.
But then when you stepped out of your family into the community, what was that like?
Well, I was born and raised in Queens, New York. And so there was a lot of people, it was a big city, right? And so my mom always forced me to play sports with hearing kids. And so I would go into a mainstream hearing program with hearing kids, and my understanding of the world at a young age, I knew that I was deaf. I was aware of that, but I never felt less than. Because my mom always made sure to say, hey, these are hearing people, these are deaf people, you just communicate in a different language. You're different, yes, but you're basically the same. And so what really impacted me was when I was in 5th grade, and I decided to go to a hearing school, and I was the only deaf person there. And so it was a tough experience, and I became a deaf boy. I wasn't just a boy. I was labeled as that, and I struggled with communication, and I was there for a year, and it wasn't an easy year, and I went back to the deaf school, and that's where my community was. That's where I felt I was able to grow.
Wow, definitely. So, and then, breaking down those barriers with your education, it gives you more of an opportunity to grow, right?
Definitely. If you have a language foundation at a young age, by the time you're 5 or 6 years old, you're able to express your feelings, your emotions, and thoughts. And so I was able to support and identify myself as a deaf person. So I couldn't imagine later on struggling with that kind of identity crisis.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree that every child really needs to have that strong personal identity, no matter who that child is. So to think that they're capable.
Absolutely.
And as you know, we both being deaf, when we go out in the community where hearing people are, sometimes they see us as different, regardless of the fact that we're happy being deaf and we're happy in the deaf world, that we, like you have a fully accessible language at your house. I wonder if you might have any humorous anecdotes to share with us about funny things that happened, funny reactions you may have gotten from hearing people out there.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, there's something that still happens to me today over and over again. There seems to be no change since I was younger. It doesn't matter how much time I bug them to change it, but every time I fly, I go into the airport and I get on my flight, and when I land and get off, I'm always provided with a wheelchair that has been prepared for me with my name on it, Nyle DiMarco. And I say, why? I've never requested a wheelchair. I never told them I was deaf even. I guess whoever let me in on the plane saw I was deaf and seemed like there's some kind of disability button, which means that disabled applies in general, that you need a wheelchair, but a lot of people with disabilities don't need wheelchairs, obviously. And I'm not saying all deaf people need a wheelchair. Obviously, there's some deaf wheelchair users, but if you're not requesting a wheelchair, why are they giving me one? I don't get it.
Yeah, and that happens to me as well pretty often. Yeah, and I think that's just really funny because people think, okay, if you can't hear, that means you can't walk. I mean,
right.
I just don't get how they make that connection.
And we obviously walked into the airplane, so.
Yeah, right? So it makes you think, okay, how is it? I guess maybe the airlines are just trying to provide the most service they can, but it's just odd, isn't it?
I guess so, but they obviously need to figure out a better system. I'm not sure what that would look like, but maybe we can ask. If I ask for one, they provide it. If not, they don't.
Yeah, so basically, do you think the airlines ought to be honoring your request whether or not you really need it? I guess that must be their customer service motto or something.
Yeah, I guess maybe, but it makes it worse if they just go ahead and provide it just in case, but other people might actually need it, but I don't need it,
Yeah, that's a valid point. Sometimes I think it's really important that, cultural awareness. I mean, here Google is so amazing at trying to understand the deaf and hard of hearing community with providing sign language services for those who don't sign, and to really make sure there's that distinction between the kind of services that hard of hearing people need as opposed to people who are deaf and use sign language, and try to build that stuff into our platforms. And so I'm really hoping that, you know, like the airline industry, you know, they think that there's one type of deaf person and that they kind of blanketly assign that characterization to all disabilities or something.
Right. Well, I was wondering, you know, deaf people are part of the disabled community, but we need a different type of access. Our accessibility has to do with having an interpreter present, having closed captions, but also another type of accessibility is access to sign language and access to education and deaf schools and where deaf students go. That's the type of accessibility we need, which is very different from other disabilities.
Yeah, and this is a perfect segue down to something I wanted to ask you about. Can you talk about one of your big ambitious goals, a cause that you're connected to, the Nyle DiMarco Foundation, where you're really focusing on this phenomenon of language deprivation among deaf children? And to that end, I have a couple of questions. First of all, what is language deprivation? What does that mean? And then secondly, why do you think we at Google should care about this?
Okay, well, language deprivation is what millions of deaf children, they reach the age of 5 without any language foundation. And that could lead to brain damage, that could lead to depriving them of ability to succeed. And so if they don't have that language foundation by the end of 5, that part of their brain where language learning is essentially closed to them. And often many doctors and speech pathologists, many hearing people in general, don't want to teach ASL to deaf kids. They feel like ASL could harm their English language learning ability, but it's not true. It's just like any language. If you learn one language, it can make learning future languages much easier. And that's what happens, though. A lot of deaf children fall in the cracks of the system and they arrive kindergarten without any type of language ability. And so I work with an organization called LEAD K, which is Language Equality and Acquisition for All Deaf Kids. And we're writing a legislative bill at the state level, and we're hoping that they're going to pass it. And what it says that every child that's born from day one of their birth must have access to language. And so through that process, the first 5 years of their upbringing, that their language learning skills will be monitored annually. And they will have milestones set and benchmarks to make sure that if they're getting behind, they need to transfer and focus more on another language to pick up on that. For example, if their English skills aren't successful and their ASL skills are, they can focus more on one than the other and vice versa. And so that's our approach, and that's what we're trying to do with this LEAD K. And so far, 8 or 9 states have passed it, and I'm hoping that more will soon. And your second question, what was it again?
Well, why should we at Google care about this?
Right. Well, why you should care is because there are millions and millions of deaf people worldwide. We have over 466 million deaf people, including people with hearing loss. So a lot of technology that we need to use to be able to function easier in everyday life. And so really, there's marketing there for Google. And I remember there's one example that we were talking about earlier as far as speech to text. I use that all the time with my hearing friends when we're chatting, and I just bring it with me. I don't have to bring a pen and paper anymore. I can save trees that way. And it's, in a nice way, you know, our conversation's a lot easier, and I can save our conversation, and it's easier for me to remember what we said and keep in touch that way.
Yeah, so basically your big ambition, your big goal here is to really help deaf children, especially by the age of 5, succeed academically and with their personal growth as well, right?
Yes, that's one of my biggest goals, because I realized with my upbringing, I thought that all deaf lives were similar to mine, but there's only 2% of deaf people have access to education in sign language, only 2%. And so I was part of that 2%, you too maybe.
Right.
And so how can we solve that problem and prevent language deprivation? By adding more technology, and that's something that Google can do. And so it brings me to another point that I have. I think that Google should build some type of VR technology or some type of AR, and that would focus on language learning and help provide deaf children who live in the middle of nowhere, for instance, maybe in Oklahoma somewhere, rural Oklahoma, where they don't have a large deaf community and they don't have too many services for the deaf. How can those children learn language? Through VR technology, they could learn a language that way. Or through AR, and AR would be a good example of reading books, and having AR on there, you could see the sign language pop up, and then the children could help them learn how to read and learn sign language simultaneously. And so technology, that's something that we can do here.
I think that's a fantastic idea where we at Google could start thinking about how we can help reduce this language deprivation through technology, especially for those who are underprivileged, or like you're saying, they live out in the middle of nowhere, maybe underprivileged, and so this language deprivation happening to them is like a double negative. And you and I, coming from more privileged or stronger deaf communities, can also help with that. So I think this is a great idea. What other technical solutions do you think should be improved to help improve deaf people's lives, or as well as deaf children?
Well, other types of technology, AR and VR.
Well, is there anything else, like, for example, home systems?
That's right. We discussed a bit about that a little bit before this. So what I would love to have, I always forget to shut my refrigerator door, for example.
Oh, yeah.
And so I don't want to waste any food. So how could something let me know? And so some type of service that could send me a notification directly to my phone that would tell me that your refrigerator is open, close it, and I would know to close it. Or your garbage disposal, sometimes I leave it running and you need to switch it off. I don't want to forget that, something could happen. Or if your water faucet is running, maybe if someone knocks at my door, it could give me a notification. So it'd be really nice to have that access.
Yeah, no, I agree. As far as the refrigerator goes, I live in a house, and I never know if it might be the door might be just slightly ajar, and it makes a beeping noise, but that's not something I can hear. I would never know. And my wife is also deaf, and so we'll be walking around the house, and this beep could be going on for hours and hours, and we never know. And it isn't until our in-laws come over and they're like, "Hey, what's that beep, beep, beep?" And we're like, "Oh."
Oh, you're right. I have a funny story. So last Christmas, I posted an Instagram story with my family at their house, and some of my fans were sending me messages on Twitter saying, "Nyle, your house, there's an alarm going off in your house. We needed to replace our fire alarm battery." So I was like, "Oh, okay." And so we replaced the battery, and I had to ask the neighbor, "Do you hear any beeping?" "No?" "Okay, great, no problem." And then 2 weeks later, it happened again, the same problem. "Hey, your house, it's still beeping. You got to change the battery." So I wish it could just let me know by notifying my phone. It would be much easier.
Now, can't we come up with some technology that's going to solve this issue so that make his fans happy?
Right, definitely. And it's embarrassing too. I felt so embarrassed.
I can't imagine you reading all these comments, and then it happens again. It happens twice. No, I think it's a good idea. Technological solutions that help our personal lives with just these little things, but they could also benefit deaf and hard of hearing people around the world. The tech industry is very innovative. It's always pushing the edge of what's possible and trying to improve people's lives. And so now is really a prime time to get these ideas going. Do you have any advice for us to think about for community members of the tech community? What should they be thinking about?
Well, first off is an obvious one. Always be sure to include deaf people or deaf people in the process of their own specialty. And so, you can't do it without them, obviously. And secondly, I would like tech companies to start thinking about data gathering. And as far as sign language has been here for over hundreds of years, and we are just negating it, that it's an actual language, and as far as language conservation, spoken languages are being saved, but ASL is one of the most popular languages right now. American Sign Language is being taught everywhere, and we need to think about how we can preserve American Sign Language and all those different types of sign languages worldwide. And so data gathering is something that's there. And as far as building VR or AR, I feel like when we're developing that, we can gather some data on sign language as well. And maybe in 50 years, we won't use VR or AR anymore, but we can develop some type of hologram. And how could the hologram know sign language? We'd have that data already, and we could just input that data, and it would be really nice to do that. And it could have a large impact on helping children learn sign language. And data gathering is so important for so many different types of purposes, and we really need to use it in the future.
Yeah, I do have one more question for Nyle, and then I'll be turning it over to you in the audience if you have any questions you'd like to ask. So there's one thing I want to expand on, and this is this whole idea of data collection. I think that data is the new gold in the tech industry. Obviously, it's valuable, and the more you have, the more you can help people's lives. So how do you think having this data not only can help us eventually make a hologram, but eventually help us in education? How can we use that data to help deaf children experience less language deprivation?
Well, I think companies can start developing VR or programs and data collection can be parallel to work with deaf organizations, like I mentioned Lead K,
right,
and organizations like that. I think we need some type of support from tech that could help us pass these laws at a state level, and deaf people and deaf children who need to learn sign language, they could learn it through this technology that we create with the aid of the tech companies. And so it could be like a partnership. That's missing right now. And does that answer your question?
Yeah. So I think basically it's just really important that we have these technological solutions, and we're developing products, and we're offering them, say, to nonprofit organizations or to those organizations who are on the front line serving deaf people and deaf children, those who really need it. And they might not be technically proficient themselves. So,
right.
But yet this technology, if we hand it over to them, is going to change their lives, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the deaf community, and they can build a bridge to the world, because they know best what their needs are, and what support and help they might need specifically.
That's true. So much is possible. Well, all right then. We'd love to hear any of you if you have questions for Nyle about deaf community being a member of a deaf community, or about Lead K or technology solutions. Basically, we'd like you to approach the microphone that's here in the middle of the room to ask your question. So who'd like to be first?
So one technology that Google is pretty good at is video. We have YouTube and also Hangouts. So I was curious how feasible it is to learn sign language over video, or whether you have to be in person with someone to really be able to learn it.
I think that language acquisition, picking up full immersion is better. So, being a part of the deaf community. But, I've seen some of my hearing friends, and it seems like they're picking up a lot of signs and basic sign language through apps, and you still can do it that way. And so I'm encouraging VR or AR because it's more realistic, and you can see the different perspectives as far as the different sides of the person, because sign language itself is 3D, not 2D, right? So you kind of need to see all of the different angles. But yeah, VR or AR, I think that's the closest thing to full immersion.
Absolutely. So next question from the audience.
Why is it often difficult for deaf children to get accessibility to learning language?
It's a very complex question. Bottom line is, doctors and speech pathologists tend to not include American Sign Language as an option, or they'll tend to tell the hearing parents, don't encourage your child or teach them ASL because it could interrupt their speech process and their English language learning. So for some reason, I don't know why, but it's not true at all. ASL helps with that process. And it's even been proven through researchers that ASL enhances their ability to speak. And so it's really ironic to tell the parents no. It's so incorrect. And so it's a battle that we're fighting against Big Pharma. And so that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. More questions?
You mentioned a little bit about including deaf people in the process. So do you have any specific advice, keeping in mind to not like overburden the minorities, like the deaf people already working at Google, but when to reach out, like how to reach out to include deaf people in the process, like how early, maybe how many, and when the idea is fully baked or early in the brainstorming process?
You know, my answer is the first day, the first day of that process. If you want to build that technology, go ahead and get in touch with an appropriate person who is fluent in sign language. And I'm sure that, you know, you can figure out how many deaf people you might need in that process or who's an expert in what particular field, and they can help you find references. But better to do day one than a year later and realize you've all got it wrong and you have to go way back to the beginning and start over.
Yeah, great question.
Yes.
Someone else?
There's a good example as far as gloves. I have, my fans keep sharing with me over and over again that there was a man who invented gloves that could translate into, you know, whatever language into sign language, but no deaf people were a part of that development process. And it doesn't work because most percentage of sign language is based on facial expression. So we use a lot of facial expressions with the ASL grammar. That's part of ASL, an American Sign Language. So if there's no facial expressions, that technology completely failed. You know, it broke down.
Yeah, so basically that product was you know, biased by the ignorance of those who didn't have any background in the culture, right?
Yes, exactly. And some college students who were bored tried to invent something, but they got it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, I'd love to hear more about apps. You know, and you said some of them work. Why do they work, and what's the process? I mean, maybe the Google community could learn about from the ones that were successful.
Well, we partnered with ASL App, and ASL App has over 800 conversational signs.
Wow.
And a lot of hearing people, I think in the first 2 years, we were about 1.5 million people downloaded it, which is great. And it's nice that for people to learn basic sign language. And ASL App also provides deaf cultural tips, which is really nice, so people have a bit more of an understanding of our culture. What was your question again?
Well, it was more, you know, what was the process of making that app? How did you work with the team? You were involved since day one, or how did it go?
Oh, I joined a little bit later, but who built ASL App was deaf people. And so it was a deaf team from day one. I don't think there was even a hearing person involved. And so they built the best ASL service out there because it was built by deaf people, and we know best. And a lot of programs that I've seen on the internet that are developed by hearing people teaching sign language, there's so many errors and there's so many signs that are incorrect. And so that causes even more, you know, harm than good.
Wow, so basically best practice is, for the industry, is partner with the deaf community, or even better, hire them as consultants.
Yes,
right?
hire them as a consultant. That's the best way to get them as a part of your team. And save yourself through that process, because, you know, make sure that technology is correct, you're teaching the signs that are correct, and you know, don't waste money on a technology that won't work in the end.
Yeah, a lot of technology sometimes you need to figure out what are the risks, right? And this is pretty low risk if you do it that way, right?
Right. I suggest that you work with deaf people, then it's less of a risk.
Right. Yeah, and user experience is the most important thing, right? I'd love to have maybe one more question from the audience.
Like in recent years, there's been more and more TV shows, Broadway shows, movies where like being deaf is an important focus of the show. And so first, I mean, but it feels like the, how do you say, the deaf community here and the hearing communities are still separate. So like, what are other ways to build a bridge between the two communities, you think?
Great question.
In the entertainment industry specifically, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I've noticed that there's been a lot more sign language exposure in TV and film, but there's still a lot of the roles are played by hearing people. And so, we can tell, even if the hearing person is a very great actor, we still know that they're not deaf because we can tell by their accent of the signs they're using, their facial expressions. We just know instantly. It's obvious that they're not deaf. But there's still a lot of deaf actors that are up and coming. But how we can build a bridge is really including deaf writers or deaf story editors, folks who are reading through the script that make sure that the story about deaf people is accurate. And so if there's more deaf talent coming in and getting involved in TV shows, but based on my experience, there's a bit of a disconnect because the hearing writers don't know specifically about the deaf community, and they need to include more of us in the process. And there's not too many deaf writers and producers and directors, for example. So it's something that really needs to be invested into building that foundation, and then later on we can integrate.
Yeah, I would love to hear you talk more about what deaf talent is and why that's sort of a big deal today in the deaf community, deaf and disabled community. Say more about that.
Well, it's a funny thing because about 4 or 5 years ago, I don't remember exactly, but at that time there was no deaf talent or a hashtag for our movement. And so there was a director, and the director said, "Hey, yeah, we really want a deaf person, but we don't know where to find them." I said, "Really? On social media, it's so easy to find someone." And so, so we started building that hashtag, deaf talent. And then if you look up deaf talent, hashtag deaf talent, you'll see all kinds of deaf people and what they're working on in their profession. And that's what happened. And why it's important is it's easier to find us that way.
So basically, it's giving them the opportunity to pursue their passion on equal footing, so that they compete for roles just like hearing people do.
Right, absolutely. It makes it easier for casting directors. And so if they're having a hard time finding a deaf person, they can look at the hashtag and the threads and find someone there, hopefully.
Absolutely, and the technology makes that all accessible. All right, we have time for one last question before we wrap this up. Go ahead.
So you mentioned the deaf talent hashtag, and following people on social media is a great way of kind of immersing yourself in the experiences of the deaf community. Who, apart from yourself, would you recommend following and keeping track of to stay kind of up to date?
Sure, I would suggest Marlee Matlin, Lauren Ridloff. Right now, she's involved in one of the new Marvel movies. It's called Eternals. And so she's the first deaf actress. That's the first deaf superhero in a Marvel film. And I love Chellaman. And Chellaman is a deaf transgender person. And the lovely thing about him is that he wasn't raised with any deaf culture, and he's just recently learning sign now. And so he's really big on accessibility, and he's a great advocate. And I really like him because he shows two different types of deaf people in his world. One is culturally deaf like me, and the other one is not culturally deaf, but still we have to consider him as deaf also because he's part of our community.
Wow, so do you feel that social media, the tech companies that created that is really helping to improve people's lives? They're helping them find jobs, helping them get auditions?
Right, finding jobs and auditions and identity as well. And people can find themselves and find their own community. And that's what happened with Chellaman, who I just mentioned, is he had so many different identities and he couldn't find someone to relate to. And so he created that platform for himself, and now people can follow him.
Yeah, so technology really, it's empowering. It's empowering people to become less disenfranchised. I'd like to get back to this other point about the Nyle DiMarco Foundation. How can technology empower deaf youth What do you see that's been working? What do you see that's been not working?
What is working, what I've seen, is ASL storybooks. And so when you see these books on like YouTube, for example, they have a person signing with the English translation. And so I've seen a lot of deaf children using that, and they really love it so much. And when I was small, I had to use my mom, right? I'd say, Mom, can you please read me a book? So she would hold the book and then sign it. So obviously my mom didn't have all the time in the world to do that. So it's really nice to have that to, if you're busy, you can continue to be independent, but have that. And that's really working because it's helping kids read and have access to language simultaneously. And so tech companies should explore that. And why I mentioned AR is because I feel that AR is amazing. It's an amazing way for deaf children to read and learn a language.
So my understanding is that deaf children are, deeply immersed in social media now. Why are they so immersed in it, do you think? Is it because of language deprivation, or?
I'm not sure why, but deaf people love social media. This applies to hearing children too, just being so immersed in technology today. But I think that because today's technology is more and more accessible, and so finally people are able to join in. I remember when YouTube was established, when I was a little boy, I never understood YouTube until maybe about 5 to 7 years ago when captioning was finally available. And I was like, oh, people are talking about makeup? They're teaching makeup? Why is that? I didn't know what YouTube was all about until they had captioning. And that was, oh, I could do that too. And then, it's really interesting to mention why accessibility is important. So deaf people are still catching up in that way.
So pretty much one feature that really creates accessibility and is really the game changer is, how you become aware of the world, right? I mean, that's what's so empowering.
Yes, it puts us on an equal position of power. And I think that when you invest in technology, you're investing in everyone.
Yeah, so, and you can give back and use the platform as well, right? Great. Well, thanks so much for listening to our chat. We'll be around if there's more questions. Thanks so much for coming, and thank you, Nyle, for coming.
Thank you.
Today.
Thank you all for coming too.